I think there's no better way to start the year off than with Amiga video, so let's do just that. Walker is a side-scrolling arcade shooter where you control a huge mech, plowing through hundreds upon hundreds of minuscule enemy soldiers and vehicles, exactly like mechs tend to do. Unusually to all other scrolling shooters, however, you move left and not right, which is odd but not something you won't get used to in 5 minutes. Walker is built out of 4 levels, each ending with an epic boss fight and each differently themed. First is set in 1944 Berlin, second in 2019 LA, third in a very generalized and stereotypical Middle East, and last in the year 2420 during the so-called The Great War. Not to mistake with 1914's The Great War. To defeat the enemies you have unlimited use machine guns and limited rockets. The guns overheat after constant use, however, so you have to manage your series of shots and not just hold the trigger pressed at all times. Well, the proverbial trigger, as you'll be clicking a mouse really. Either way, you have to pick and choose your targets well, as the enemies will be coming at you from all sides, so going for the most dangerous ones is a must if you aim to survive, and possibly even complete the game. Naturally, if or when your mech is destroyed, you lose a life, and when all 3 are lost, the game ends. Graphically and sound-wise, especially if you have 2 MB of RAM, the game is pretty nice and sounds great. Something that we've grown used to in DMA Designs games. The very same DMA that years later became Rockstar. The gameplay is rather solid too, pitting you against thousands of tiny soldiers armed with various guns and machinery, making you feel like a badass unstoppable invader. So nothing to complain about in the fun department either. Apart from getting a bit repetitive more or less 2 levels in, that is. But destroying those small couple of pixels tall enemies is very enjoyable, so it's not something that would discourage from completing this otherwise pretty short title. While Walker was designed for one player where joystick is used to control the mech and mouse to shoot, it can actually be played in co-op multiplayer, where each person controls one of the 2 inputs. It may sound odd, but it's surprisingly fun, especially when drinks are involved. The Speris Legacy is a top-down action adventure role-playing, and when it came out it looked and played a lot like Zelda on SNES does, for the first 30 minutes or so at least. Cause upon closer inspection, other than the presentation and gameplay mechanics, it was nowhere near as good as the original was. It's not terrible, mind you, just not as good as everyone was hoping that it would be. Especially in 1996, when Amiga was already commercially dead and the remaining user base craved something new and epic. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. What is it all about? Well, there is a kingdom, and it's ruled by a wise and just king. The king had 2 sons, and as in most fairy tales, or games for that matter too, one was good and the other was evil. And the evil one killed the good. Now, seeing what became of his only son, the king disowned him and asked you, the protagonist, named Cho by the way, 1 O away from being Chu, like a Chu. Anyway, he asked you to get rid of his evil son in exchange for the throne. If that sounds stupid, then it's good, cause that's precisely how it is. Stupid. Aside from being a pretty sweet deal for the Cho, that is. Zelda was a very simplified RPG, to the very core of the genre in fact, but it more than made up for it with gripping story and addictive gameplay full of secrets and little adventures to be had. The Speris Legacy is as simple, if not simpler even, and does not even try to make things right. It just assumes that the similar enough concept, presentation and mechanics will make it a must-have and ends up being an odd game, where you can theoretically do the same things you could in the classic, so walk, look at things, talk to characters and fight, but instead of becoming a legendary title, it became a caricature of the original only. On the plus side though, the enemies are quite varied and interestingly designed, but given how some of them can only be defeated by certain weapons and others are near impossible to keep an aim on, the combat system generally speaking is quite uneven. The game world is pretty huge, way bigger than I ever expected it to be, but also quite empty, meaning that there's not much there to do other than the plot pushing stuff. So more often than not, you'll find yourself wandering around the map looking for something, anything to do, which is not a great game design. Speris' graphics are pretty nice, even if nothing to write home about, and the sounds are decent. Music, however, gets old fast and there's no way of turning it off, which is tad annoying. Now, I seem to be dumping on the Speris Legacy as if it was a monstrosity on a Pro Soccer 2190 scale, but no, it's not. In fact, it's okay. It really is, and I'm only complaining because it had a huge potential. The building blocks are there, it just failed to deliver on all of them, and ended up being average at best. Super Taekwondo Master is a sequel to year prior's Taekwondo Master, and also an obscure Polish versus fighting game in vein of Mortal Kombat, meaning that it uses digitized graphics for its fighters, but despite being released few years after the classic, its presentation is subpar at best and terrible at worst. The fighters themselves are decently made, solid 4, maybe 4.5 out of 10, but there's barely 6 of them and they have 4 special moves each only. Yes, 4. And if these were fun, explosive, imaginative or even combo opening attacks, it would be all fine. No, really, it would, as the game would become a bit more technical than most other fighters on the market were. But they're not. They're as sad and disappointing as the rest of it is. The backgrounds, while scrolling unlike in original Taekwondo Master, are a jumbled mess. I mean, they look if someone was given access to Microsoft Paint, or Deluxe Paint in case of the Amiga, and 15 minutes each to create them, having no intimate knowledge of how the software works at all. So they're full of heavily contrasting and not well fitting together colors and objects of questionable genesis. Some of them straight up look as if the artist was just trying out different brushes on them, and then after doing so decided not to clear them off and leave them as they were. There are a few gameplay modes included, but they're your typical fare for the genre of single player versus and tournament-like modes, so not much to talk about really. And even in 2-player versus with a buddy, Super Taekwondo Master is only ever fun for a few minutes. Oh, and for whatever the reason, the game speed is tied to the speed of your system, so if you played via emulation or on an upgraded Amiga, it may actually run way too fast to be even playable. Keep that in mind. Carcharodon White Sharks is one of the most beautiful games on the Amiga, and a pretty decent while not outstanding at anything that it does, horizontally scrolling shoot 'em up. While aforementioned graphics can be stunning, especially some of the backgrounds, enemy sprites and some of the bosses being the obvious examples of that, the gameplay is rather bland. It's basically legions of enemies coming at you from all sides, and they move so fast that you hardly ever get a chance to stop pressing the fire button for your finger to recover. I'm not sophisticated when it comes to my shooters, and I like them simple, other than the Deluxe Galaga / Warblade that is. So this is not a big issue for me. But if you expect novelty, complicated boss tactics and memorization of enemy attack and approach patterns, there are far better games than this one on the Amiga. What's most notable about Carcharodon though is its unique weapon system, which allows for combining them together, and given the choices in the game, there's literally close to 37 million different possible combinations. And I'm not shitting you, that's the number. Sure, while that's obviously a lot, it doesn't really feel like it, so don't let the number fool you into thinking that the game is something else, something more than it is. The number is heavily inflated and most of the possible combinations will hardly feel any different. And what Carcharodon really is just a competent playing and awesome looking shooter, nothing more, nothing less. If you're a fan of a genre, you've played better, believe me, but definitely don't skip this one either. If you're not, give it a go, I think it's worth at least a try. While still beautiful and technically impressive, Shadow of the Beast 3 does not leave you awed and as impressed as previous titles did. But just because it's not as immediately stunning doesn't mean that it's bad. In fact, it's the best playing out of all three. And honestly, in terms of pure gameplay at least, there's no competition really. Beast games seem to follow a very odd formula of the better it looks, the worse it plays. And this, third one, is definitely least flashy of them all. But one I can actually enjoy and get behind. With first two only ever serving as Amiga capabilities show-offs, at least that's how I used them, that is. So, Shadow of the Beast 3 being an action puzzle platformer is utterly enjoyable and the first game in the series that actually feels as if it was designed to be played and not only looked at. And as that, it features considerably smaller areas, more contained, better designed and with severely limited randomness in its enemies spawning and attacking mechanics, making it considerably more predictable, less frantic and as a result, tons more fun. Beast 3 starts off when the second ended. You're finally human and you must once again face Meloth, the Beast Lord, in order to break his curse and be able to come back home. To defeat him though, you must gain enough power to stand a chance, and you will by collecting 4 mythical artifacts. Each of them hidden in a different level, so same as in most other platformers, progress in Beast is very linear. The game is full of various environmental puzzles, mainly focusing on finding and operating various thematically fitting apparatus and opening doors and passages. While this third outing may not be the best presentation-wise out of all three, it is still the very top tier of what Amiga could offer and looks and sounds phenomenal. The music especially is fantastic. So, if you saw first and second game on any other system and would like to learn how the story concluded, Amiga is the only machine you'll be able to do so on. Megaball is a public domain game, meaning it was distributed freely in a reduced format with less levels included and no level editor. Registering and paying for a full version, however, unlocks all these missing features. It's kinda similar but not identical to shareware that we know from PC. It is also barn on the best version of Arkanoid or Breakout on the system. and with all the levels available, extra paddle upgrades and included built-in lever editor, it easily offers hundreds upon hundreds of hours of fun. If you've never played either of the classics, then first of all, I don't believe you, and second, let me explain. Megaball is a single-screen arcade title in which there are colorful bricks on top of the screen arranged in various patterns, and you control the paddle sliding on the bottom. And that paddle's used to bounce the ball at the bricks to destroy them. When destroyed, they drop upgrades from time to time, which can range from simple paddle size enlargement through ability to hold the ball, to mounting the paddle with cannons that can shoot powerful projectiles destroying everything in their way, and all that is barely just scratching the surface. The level is considered completed when all bricks are cleared, and you lose life when the ball is not bounced and falls through the bottom of the screen. It's a simple but addictive mechanic that we saw in hundreds of other games, but Megaball perfected the formula. I don't think that there are many games in the genre, even today, that could compare with Megaball's ingenuity. Perhaps early 2000s DX Ball on PC could, but if that's even the case, it would still leave Megaball as one of the two best Arkanoid clones ever made. If you like those kinds of games, Megaball is one that you should not skip. Would an 8-bit kind of a design game work in 16-bit games clothing? Well, we've seen dozens on this channel that tried and failed. Often terribly, either not looking or sounding up to par, or even worse, playing like a memory you long wanted forgotten. Naughty Ones is a flick-screen arcade platformer with some very superficial puzzling and a lot of pixel-perfect platforming. The idea behind it is that simple. In essence, all you have to do is find the key, which will automatically open the passage to the next level, and then go through that passage. Rinse and repeat. Nothing less, nothing more. And while that sounds simple, no doubt about that, the levels are filled with the enemies and dozens of timing-based environmental hazards. So, these enemies naturally have to be shot or avoided, though given the game's design and need to often take the same route more than once, shooting is nearly always a better choice. Various upgrades can be found and picked up while playing, but they're usually placed in difficult to get to locations, so it's often a gamble between either risking a life and trying to get them or playing it safe and just chasing the keys. Your call. Defeated enemies drop coins which offer points rewards, and since it's an 8-bit game at its heart, you play for points. And fun, but mainly points. Naughty Ones do not place any time limits on how long you've got to beat the level, so you can be as fast or as methodical as you'd like. Plenty of safe spots on each of the screens and no need for memorization of any kind make the game utterly enjoyable, even if not especially complex. Now, despite what I said, Naughty Ones' simplicity don't make it easy. It's quite difficult in fact, the latter levels especially, but never unfair. So if you take your time, approach them strategically, you should be able to complete the game no problem. Graphics and sounds are pretty good too, so they nicely round up the game's package into a singular, very enjoyable experience. Oh, and best of all, Naughty Ones can be played in simultaneous multiplayer, which is nearly always the best way any game can be appreciated. Agent CZ, aka Agent Czesio, is an extremely basic, obscure Polish platformer. Not basic because it's Polish, but because, well, it just is. Surprisingly devoid of variety is what I'm trying to say here. It only ever released in Polish, but despite that you don't really need to read or understand anything in it, as it's as simple to play as it is to bake a cake. And if you don't know how to make one, it's that simple. To make a cake, you take a cake and then you make it. Period. I know, cringe, but it's more of a joke for me rather than for you. I just adore its idiotic simplicity. Anyway, Agent CZ is a gather all objects, time your jumps well and avoid obstacles kind of a game. And that's precisely what you'll be mainly doing, other than looking for something else to play, that is. And it's also a perfect example of a late-budget Amiga title, that there's nothing wrong about per se, but also nothing spectacular about it either. It seems as if it was made just because it could be made and some money could be earned by its sales. Not because someone had a vision and wanted to release a great Amiga platformer. It's a game that you may fire up and complete once, maybe twice if you're bored beyond belief, but after that, you will definitely never get back to it again. Does it mean it's a bad one? Not necessarily, but it's aggressively average or even a little below it. And a title that's not really worth tracking down if you don't already have it in your library. Agent's graphics are uninspired and quite disappointing too. Colorful, but somehow also bland looking. I know, makes no sense, but just look at them. Can't they be both in the same time? It feels that they can. Sounds and music are pretty bad too, so I won't get into any more details about them. So, make what you want of what I just said. Play it or not, in this particular case, I couldn't care less. The Last Soldier is a side-view action platformer set during the World War II, and it starts off with one of the most terrible intros that I've seen on the Amiga. But fortunately, it's not the intro that makes the game, it's the content and gameplay that do it. And in the case of the latter two, The Last Soldier comfortably falls somewhere between average or slightly tiny itty-bitty above it, which is not a given for those late Polish releases. That said, The Last Soldier, surprisingly, is not terrible. You play as this commando type of a soldier who is sent into a Nazi bunker to turn on 4 reactors in it and then destroy it. As background stories go, it may not be the best, but it's a platformer, so it hardly needs one. Said bunker naturally is not standing there empty, waiting for you to send it into oblivion, but is full of enemies. And these can be soldiers, mini-tanks, turrets, rocket launchers, and many others. The variety is definitely not an issue here. You're equipped with an AK-47 and have to constantly feed it more bullets as they're not unlimited. You're reloaded by finding ammo boxes scattered around the bunker, but they're not the only pickups you'll get to grab on your adventure, as there are also medikits that replenish your health, petrol canisters, passkeys and access codes too, for that little environmental puzzling that most platformers have. Graphics-wise, it's not great. I mean, the presentation alone is subpar, but then there are the animations. And let me tell you, they're way below what you'd expect from the Amiga. That said, as odd as it sounds, you get used to it after a while, and it's not as annoying later on as it initially is. The bunker itself is a pretty huge maze, and since the game features no map whatsoever, you're either gonna have to attempt the impossible and memorize it, or resort to drawing a map of it by hand, like we used to for 8-bit games, which, while tiresome, is actually a huge hit of nostalgia, if you get those, that is. The Last Soldier is not a great game, but given all its shortcomings, I'd still say that it's worth a playthrough, as it's not as bad as it appears to be on the surface. So if you get a chance, at least give it a try. Maximum speed, maximum excitement, maximum fun, Max Rally, yeah! Cue the explosions, fireworks and some shots of fast cars racing Bruce. Bruce? Darn it, I keep forgetting that he's on holidays. Oh well, imagine all this here on the screen at once and a fast-paced racing music. Max Rally is a late Amiga public domain, top-down racer. And as these go, it's actually pretty fun. Though arguably by 1998 hardly anyone got to enjoy it nearly half a decade after Amiga's untimely demise. It features a single-player championship mode, which is the meat on the bones of the game, a time trial, which is self-explanatory, and 2 multiplayer modes, that I'll mention a bit later on. The championship mode is composed out of 5 levels, each consisting of 5 tracks, and it's up to you to decide which order you'd like to tackle them in. Every race pits you against 3 AI opponents, and whomever ends first after 12 laps wins. Christopher Lambert once said there can be only one, and whichever of you gets the reference is hella cool. Same in Max Rally. There's 4 of you on the track, but only one winner. So if you don't come first, it's as if you lost regardless where you've placed. Between the regular levels there are also special challenge tracks on which you have to chase the screen, don't let it outrun you and don't fall off the edge of it. These are much more difficult than the regular races though, like many times more demanding, which makes Max Rally feel a bit uneven. That said, it's a public domain game with no large studio behind it, so it's easy to forgive such an annoying perhaps, but understandable lack of playtesting. In up to 4 racers multiplayer, you can either race to see who gets to the finish line first, or battle it out Micro Machine style for points, trying to race ahead enough to have your opponents disappear at the edge of the screen. Whomever gets 5 points first wins. And obviously it's the multiplayer that's most fun, but that's hardly a surprise, isn't it? Max Rally's graphics are pretty nice, though nothing groundbreaking, but the small cars and zoomed out viewpoint make for considerably easier gameplay than it otherwise would have been heavily zoomed in like Micro Machines for instance. Oh, and since we're on the classic, which of the two do you think is better? Do you think Max Rally can be as good or even better than Micro Machines? I hope that you said no, because it's not. But it's also not that far off, so if you like the Micro Machines, you like the Max Rally too. First video of the year, so hopefully you like it. Whichever the case, let me know in the comments below. If you like the video, hit those like and subscribe buttons below. Smash them if you have to, it helps more than you could ever know. Also, I would like to thank you and all my amazing Patreon and YouTube members for helping this channel keep going. And last but definitely not least, I would like to thank all the wonderful folks who record and upload playthroughs, let's plays and other retro-centric videos here on YouTube, because they help to preserve the games that would have otherwise belonged forgotten. So thank you.